And good evening, Santa Cruz. My name is Sandino Gomez, and I'll be your host tonight for Voices from the Village, community television's longest-running public affairs talk program, where we explore the issues that you are concerned about, Santa Cruz. And speaking of issues that you should be concerned about, have you ever heard of this little acronym called the NDAA? No, it's not the Delicious Association of America. National Delicious Association of America. It's not any kind of friendly acronym. It's actually a very evil acronym, if I could editorialize just a little bit. And yeah, we're going to be exploring what exactly is the NDAA and how it affects you, and how it affects you on a larger scale, as well as how it affects you here locally. What am I talking about? Well, the National Defense Authorization Act, of course. Well, you've heard about that, right? I'm sure it's been extensively covered in the mainstream media, and you've been thoroughly informed as an active citizen in this country's democracy? Oh, you haven't? Well then, that's why Voices from the Village, aka Community TV's public affairs talk program, is here to kind of explore these kinds of issues. And I'm quite proud today to say I have two genuine experts, real deal kind of folks that have been involved in these issues for a very, very long time. To my right is Danny Sheehan, who at the time, as part of the Christic Institute, was involved in the exposing of the Iran-Contra scandal in the 80s, leading to the kind of investigation by Congress, which eventually exposed much of, but unfortunately not all of, the shenanigans of the Reagan administration and kind of the CIA and the shadow government, for lack of a better terms, operations in the 80s and into the 90s afterwards as well. Now part of the Romero Institute, continuing to raise awareness around the civil liberties violations and kind of the abuse of our constitutional rights and privileges under modern day government. So again, to my right, Danny Sheehan. John Malkin, to Danny's right, is an independent journalist with Free Radio Santa Cruz for a very long time now, but he also writes for other publications such as Z Magazine, as well as locally here, The Good Times of Santa Cruz County. John has been working for a long time to bring voice to those who might not otherwise get kind of a fair shake in today's mainstream media, and certainly operating within the alternative media for a very long time. And John will be discussing a little bit about how locally here, the kind of encroachment of our civil liberties is playing out when it comes to law enforcement and people's right to be free on the streets, if you will, of unnecessary surveillance. But that being said, part of my long monologue there, welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Sandino.
Thank you, Sandino.
Danny, do you want to kick it off a little bit? Tell us a little bit about your history with this topic and kind of how you got to be involved and concerned about these issues, and then maybe just bring us up to date and what it means.
Well,
what are you working on today?
actually, my involvement in these issues began back when I was the co-founder of the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review at Harvard Law School, and we initiated the case that established the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources. And because of that, I was recruited by the big #1 law firm in the United States that represented the New York Times, and was one of the attorneys that represented the New York Times to actually get to publish the Pentagon Papers that Dan Ellsberg had brought to us to reveal the internal workings of the Pentagon in initiating the war in Vietnam, and the type of lies and dissembling that were undertaken by 3 different administrations to maintain that war. And I went on from there to joined F. Lee Bailey's law firm in Boston, and we represented James McCord in the Watergate burglary. And he's the one that blew the whistle on Richard Nixon and the plumbers that led to the resignation of Richard Nixon. And I had continued on after that and had done a number of major cases, one of which you'd mentioned at the top of the show was the Iran-Contra case that we actually discovered the existence of the off-the-shelf enterprise that was being run by Oliver North and the national security retirees that he had brought on. And we exposed that, filed a major federal lawsuit against that, and that led to the appointment of the special prosecutor. And as people may recall, when Lawrence Walsh filed his final report and had indicted 6 of the major officials of the Reagan-Bush administration, George H.W. Bush pardoned all of them.
Right.
And in his final report, Lawrence Walsh pointed out that because both the Republican and Democratic Party had refused to really do anything about this off-the-shelf enterprise, pretending that it was too complex for them to really figure out what was really going on, that we were going to all be confronted by these same men, not this time under the rubric of anti-communism, but under the rubric of anti-terrorism. He said that you're going to come to rue the day that you failed to close down this enterprise. Because as it turns out, one of the little-known facts about a well-known subject, the power that Oliver North had was because he was the deputy director of the National Security Council in charge of anti-terrorism. And all of the activities that were undertaken by the off-the-shelf enterprise to fund the Contras and to give weapons to the Hezbollah in the Middle East and all the things that they were caught doing was all being undertaken under the rubric of anti-terrorism. So that when 9/11 happened and the Congress rushed in and passed this authorization for the use of force that garnered the support not only of all of the right-wing Republicans, but also the support of Hillary Clinton, the support of John Kerry, and ultimately the support of Bill Clinton in the new, more moderate Democratic Party. We see as recently as Wednesday of this week, President Obama now coming on and announcing that he felt that he had the authority under this authorization of the use of force that was enacted in 2001 by Congress, immediately following 9/11, that he had the authority to basically declare war on the ISIS forces in the Middle East and to begin bombing in Syria and in Iraq, and to mount literally hundreds of bombing raids into the Middle East. And while he stated that he would welcome support and endorsement of his activity by Congress, he made it very clear that he didn't think that he had to ask for it, so that he has taken unto himself the authority to basically mount a major war. It's going to cost another $1 trillion and take another 10 years in the Middle East. And as we have seen over and over again, it's doing nothing but generating greater and greater opposition on the part of the groups in the Middle East. And what the Congress has done, and what both the Republican and Democratic Party have done now, is to declare everyone who is in resistance to the United States military occupation of the Middle East to be terrorists. And any activity that they engage in to try to drive the infidels, as they call them, out of the Middle East, out of the Holy Lands, is designated as an act of terrorism. Now, none of this is to suggest that the people in ISIS are not engaged in horrific activity, or that they don't have kind of reactionary worldviews, and that in fact they're distorting the basic beliefs of Islam, which they are, all of which is true. But none of those realities support the abrogation of the most fundamental constitutional requirements on the part of the president. And most importantly, and very importantly for the purposes of our discussion here today, the fact that Congress went ahead and passed and Obama signed into law, just at the beginning of 2012, this National Defense Authorization Act, which now for the first time explicitly authorizes the United States military to arrest and to take into detention American citizens here inside the United States without any probable cause to believe that they've committed any crime at all, and to incarcerate them indefinitely until the end of the duration of the hostilities, which they designate as terrorism, and that they're authorized to be put in front of military tribunals. They're prohibited from having an attorney. They're not allowed to even see all of the evidence that's going to be presented against them. They have no right to confront or cross-examine the witnesses against them. It's just an absolute nightmare. And so what we see happening here, all in the name of anti-terrorism, just as Special Prosecutor Lawrence Walsh warned us would take place, we see the absolute attack upon the most basic constitutional liberties of our people. And this matter has been litigated in front of the Federal District Court in New York. And the judge in that particular case declared this statute to be, on its face, unconstitutional. But the Justice Department of the Obama administration appealed it to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. They didn't rule on its unconstitutionality because there was no way they could deny that. But what they did is they denied the plaintiffs standing to actually object to it, saying, look, basically until you've been detained and taken away secretly and imprisoned, and where you have no ability to get at the courts, you haven't had your rights violated adequately to have any standing. So I think that it's extraordinary because people just thinking that, well, Obama wouldn't really arrest me, you know, or even my friends.
Was that the lawsuit that Chris Hedges was
Yes,
part of?
Chris Hedges and Dan Ellsberg.
Extensively about a lot of
That's
that,
right.
yeah.
Chris Hedges and Dan Ellsberg.
Wonderful work people can look up online.
Yeah,
Chris Hedges wrote extensively about being a plaintiff and eventually
it's an extraordinarily important case because the judge in that case explicitly confronted the United States attorney that was the prosecutor in that case and said, look, can you assure me that these people who are standing here as plaintiffs, Mr. Hedges and Mr. Ellsberg and other activists here, will not in fact be designated as persons who can be subjected to detention and arrest in open-ended incarceration under the rubric of them lending some type of support to anyone who may have given support to an organization that the executive branch has declared to be hostile to the United States or to any one of our allies. And so that they've now expanded clearly out from beyond Al-Qaeda. They've expanded out from beyond any of the persons who participated directly in the attack of 9/11, which is what the authorization was directly restricted to. And now they've expanded it to cover ISIS. They've expanded it to cover people here in the United States who they may unilaterally declare to have given some kind of support, either direct or indirect, to any of these organizations. And they've refused to deny that it even applies to Chris Hedges and Dan Ellsberg and others of us who have for 40 years been attempting to confront the rising national security state in the United States. So we're in an extremely dangerous situation here, and it's not unfair to analogize it to what was going on in Germany. Actually, in the 1930s, after Hitler became the chancellor.
Everything Hitler did was nice and legal.
They moved one step at
law after law to ensure it was all
one step
nice
at a
and
time
legal.
to say, oh, the statutes have covered this now, and so that I think it's important to say to Obama something that was said actually to by Spencer Tracy in that famous movie, the Nuremberg trials at the Nuremberg. That he said to the Hans Goering character, who was played by Burt Lancaster, when Burt Lancaster said that when I sentenced one person whom I knew was innocent to death, I didn't know that it would go as far as it did, that it would come this far. And Spencer Tracy looked at him and said, when you sentenced one person whom you knew was innocent to this, it had already gone that far.
Too far.
And that's what we're looking at here with the enactment of this National Defense Authorization Act. This is an action that is so completely unjustified, either factually or constitutionally, that we have now gone to that step. And it's required for all of us to mobilize and to take action against this. So what we're hoping to do is to mobilize our community against this here in Santa Cruz and have them get the city council to pass a resolution stating not only that the law enforcement authorities here in Santa Cruz and in Santa Cruz County will not affirmatively cooperate with enforcing this National Defense Authorization Act, but that in fact they will fulfill their constitutional duty to protect our citizens and to protect our Constitution against enemies both foreign and domestic.
Especially domestic.
And to any person who comes into our jurisdiction and attempts to seize an American citizen and to detain them without trial, and to detain them without the right to habeas corpus, to detain them without the right to an attorney, and to hold them incarcerated with no access to their relatives or their family or any communications whatsoever. Anyone who comes into this county or into this city and attempts to do that should in fact be stopped, but with the use of whatever force is necessary on the part of our law enforcement authorities to protect our people, and to insist that that person be brought in front of a magistrate so that the magistrate can pass on the question of whether or not there's probable cause to believe that that citizen has committed any crime, and to insist that the conditions of their detention are that they have a right to an attorney, they have a right to habeas corpus, they have a right to a trial, they have a right to a trial by a jury of their peers. All of the requirements that have been set aside by this National Defense Authorization Act, our courts and our law enforcement people and our city council should guarantee to our people.
Stand for that.
And even though our state legislature has, as of 2013, passed an ordinance, it was Public Law 351. It was called the Preservation of Liberty Act in California, that stated, and Governor Brown signed it into law, stating that no law enforcement officer in the state of California or any employee of the state of California could affirmatively participate in assisting in the enforcement of the National Defense Authorization Act. We, in our city council, took a position saying they too opposed it. But what we need to do is take that additional step now to say that not only
policy,
that,
not just
not cooperate with it,
right,
but to in fact instruct our law enforcement authorities on both the state, county, and local level that they are to protect our constitutional rights and to step in and prevent any person from being detained by any United States government official or any U.S. military official and brought immediately in front of a tribunal where their constitutional rights can be protected. That's what we're insisting upon here. And our Romero Institute is now mobilizing, and there's going to be a major event in the last week of October here, where we're going to be having a major public demonstration of what it would be like if in fact major U.S. military forces came into our town and attempted to seize and carry off our citizens and put them in front of such a tribunal.
right.
So that's the national level of this, but
Big picture.
the big picture. But the fact is that John has been focusing for some time now on some of the concrete manifestations of this kind of creeping national security state infrastructure that's being rolled into place, all under the rubric of this authorization of the use of force and the militarizing of our police departments, the maintaining of massive electronic surveillance, and just as recent as this week, on the front page of our Good Times, you see there's major articles similar to the ones that John has written in the past about the type of surveillance that's been undertaken.
You have one in here as well, don't you? Like,
Yeah.
Is that or was that last week?
I think it was last week, an
Yes.
update on the
Just had an update
situation.
on
Yes.
this, yeah, which we'll get to in a
Yeah,
second.
sure.
But before we do, I want to ask you because I know you have a lot of expertise on this, and kind of hearing you talk brought up a thought of mine, and
Yes.
like kind of I think a common misconception amongst a lot of the American public that Obama, especially candidate Obama, really sold himself. He was represented as this community organizer, constitutional lawyer. I am the anti-Bush. I'm going to change these Bush policies. I'm going to shut down Gitmo. I'm going to do all these great things. First 100 days, wonderful rhetoric.
Yeah.
What has been the reality, though? I mean, I think put the nail in that coffin that Obama's looking out for us, if you would, please.
The reality is that with the signing by Obama on New Year's Eve of 2011, the signing of this particular ordinance, federal statute, authorizing the military to detain American citizens and to deprive them of the right to counsel, Barack Obama has made it absolutely clear that he and the other members of the Democratic Party who are going to be contending the presidential nomination, for example, Hillary Clinton, who voted for this authorization, that we ought to take steps now to get the candidates for the Democratic nomination, whether it's going to be Hillary Clinton and or Vice President Biden or even Bernie Sanders, apparently from Vermont now, to put the issue in front of the American people, to have the Democratic Party take a firm position to withdraw the National Defense Authorization Act, to say that this is blatantly unconstitutional and they're going to withdraw, they're going to eschew any utilization of that statute, and they're going to mobilize their forces in Congress to set it aside, and that they're going to confront the Republican Party candidates in this the upcoming 2016 election, and draw a bright line between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and that if they refuse to do that, then they should be held accountable.
Yeah, I hope so.
Every single one of them.
Yeah. What's the difference between a government run by Republicans versus Democrats, or a government run by Democrats against Republicans? Under one system, man screws man, right? Under the other system, it's the exact opposite.
Yes. Well, there was actually an interesting, the Father Dan Berrigan, whom I represented a number of times, when he was asked one time exactly what is the difference between the Republican and Democratic Party now in these times, he said it reminded him of the time when Ronald Reagan was still governor in California, and Nancy Reagan would go around the state telling people with regard to marijuana to just say no to marijuana. And someone stood up in the audience and said, Mrs. Reagan, how can you possibly be going around telling people to just say no to marijuana when you have the governor serving alcohol to everyone right in the governor's mansion? And she waited a moment, and Dan Berrigan said that this was the standard. She said, well, if you were on a private commercial airline and the pilot was drunk on alcohol, at least you'd notice it. And so that's the whole point. That the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party, that they're doing some of these things now, and people don't seem to be noticing.
I use the metaphor of, Hannibal Lecter, and then Jason from the movie Friday the 13th, right? The machete and the hockey mask. At least you know what Jason's up to. The Republicans are very clear and obvious about it. They don't hide behind clever rhetoric. They don't pretend to be this or that. And I think the real danger lies in, the Hannibal Lecter-like character, the person that can sell you this bag of goods, that really talks a nice talk. Candidate Obama, what a wonderful guy. Oh my goodness. And yet once they get close to you, it's kind of like they're trying to cut you open and eat you.
Well,
it's just a problem that I have with both parties. They're both after me, and I'm not going to buy any of that from either of them.
Well, one of the things is, as Sarah, our executive director, points out, that it's not that there aren't any differences. I mean, there's no doubt at all that in many ways it's vastly better to have Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton or others be president of the United States rather than W. Bush or Dick Cheney. But
anyone but Cheney.
But our responsibility as progressives are to be able to mobilize our people to protect our constitutional rights, to protect our social values, even when Democrats are in positions of power, and to insist upon holding them accountable. If they want to have our votes as part of the coalition, that they have to perform. And this issue with the National Defense Authorization Act is one that we need to draw a clear line in the sand. And we cannot tolerate the Democratic Party supporting an act like this. And we need, but the job is on us to get them to respond to this. If we can mobilize and people can understand what a serious threat this is to our civil liberties, we need to mobilize that. And so that we have to do this hard work between now and 2016.
Yeah. Fair enough. John Malkin, you have an incredible history working on a lot of these issues locally. I think, as a DJ of Free Radio Santa Cruz, you've protected our civil liberties for a very long time, just via your, amazing show, The Great Leap Forward, every Wednesday at 7 p.m.
Thank you for that plug.
Oh no, absolutely. Streaming online at freakradio.org, by the way. Yeah. Free Radio Santa Cruz.
We're going to be 20 years old.
We're almost 20 years
in 2015.
It is insane.
Yeah.
But I just see that as such wonderful kind of expression of sort of what we're talking about here. Like, you have not asked for permission to be free and to speak your truth and to allow all these amazing people that you interview and the people that you work with and the musicians that you bring onto your show. Like, you're not asking for permission. You're doing the work, if you will, out of the community, as well as writing all of these wonderful articles that you do. I know you're a regular contributor to our local paper.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how you got to be such an amazing independent journalist, DJ, and author.
Well, thank you, Sandino. Part of it, actually, it's so interesting and an honor to be here with Danny. When I first moved to Santa Cruz, I got involved with the local Christic group that was part of the Christic Action Team. That was in 1989. So I helped to spread the word about the lawsuit that had to do with NSA and CIA intervening everywhere around the globe and being involved in a lot of illegal things, running drugs, running weapons, and bypassing Congress. You know, and then I decided as a community studies student that I wanted to focus on something more local. So in 1991, I joined a group here in Santa Cruz that was trying to start a police review board for the city. And I was one of the main organizers of that. And in 1995, the board was created. I was appointed by Celia Scott to be one of 7 people on this police review board, and I did that for 2 years. And I ended up resigning from the board. The board wasn't really meeting the needs of the community. People were being asked to serve on the board who would not speak up and actually say the things that we were finding in documents we were looking at with the police. The board no longer exists. The police never wanted it. And eventually the city council said that they disbanded it because of
Budgetary reasons.
How did you guess?
I remember. I
Yeah.
remember the controversy, and they went to the
Yeah.
independent police auditor, who they happened to employ.
Right.
Very independent when
Right.
you know you're employed. by
Right.
someone. Yeah.
Exactly. So I've looked at police accountability for a long time, and it ties in with all of this stuff that Danny has been doing all these years and what he's talking about now. Lately, what I discovered about a year ago, September last year, a police officer came to a city council meeting and asked that money from the Department of Justice be spent on license plate reader cameras, about $36,000. And the city council unanimously agreed to have that money buy these devices. These are cameras that go on police cars or are mounted wherever they want to mount them, on bridges, on
Right.
posts. And they take a photograph of every license plate of every car that drives by every time it drives by. And it also records the GPS location and the time. There often also is another camera that photographs the whole vehicle, which includes people in the car, location of the car. These are getting to be ubiquitous around the country, and largely money is coming from Department of Homeland Security since 2001, since 9/11. The money in this case came from Department of Justice. And I wrote an article for the Good Times about this in January of this year, and it raised some discussion, and I was pleased about that. I would say, unfortunately, it hasn't stopped the police from buying these. They are still, in research I've done in getting public records from the police here in Santa Cruz, I discovered that the police are now continuing to decide which cameras to buy, where to mount them, and where the data will be stored. And recently, the Santa Cruz chapter of the ACLU came out in opposition.
Took a stand, right?
They took a stand that was very firm, actually, saying, we don't want these at all in our community. Largely, their decision was based on the issue of data storage. So these cameras can take thousands of pictures an hour. Usually the data is stored at a fusion center. Fusion centers, there's about 80 of these across the country, and they were established by the Department of Homeland Security for storing and sharing data. The data will go to all kinds of places. The one near us is called the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center. And most police departments in our area and sheriffs and CHP store their data there. And it's shared and it's stored and it goes to Department of Homeland Security. From what I can tell from internal documents with the Santa Cruz Police, at this point, their intention is to store data there. That was the main reason why the local ACLU decided to oppose these cameras being here at all.
Right.
I want to say too that I discovered just a couple weeks ago that on August 21st, about 3 weeks ago,
Right.
the local CHP received one of these license plate reader cameras. And when I checked in and said, what do you mean by received? Like, is it in a box? What are you guys doing with it? No,
FedEx dropped it off.
yeah, it's being used in Santa Cruz County. It's, as far as I know, it's the first of these devices to be used in our community, and no one knew that, and there was no public process. I would say for a lot of us, a major point about all of this is the lack of democratic process.
I was reading that in your article that you just wrote last week about how, you know, did the announcement at the city council meeting constitute a hearing or not a hearing, or kind of this like real slick way they got this legal requirement out of the way, which really wasn't much of a public hearing.
A lot of people would point out that really, if police departments or a sheriff in your community are thinking about getting a grant to buy new surveillance devices, the public discussion should happen before they apply for the grant. So the police applied for a grant here in Santa Cruz. They received the grant. Then they went to the city council and said, we got this grant, can we use the money? This is actually another problem point that's referred to as free money. When police departments around the country, in their little city council chambers, they describe, hey, we got some money, can we spend it on this? The city council takes less interest in that than if the police said, we'd like to buy these things, it's going to cost our city $60,000. The city council people here that I could talk to that were willing to talk to me, they said, I made a mistake when I voted for these things. I frankly have wished that they would do more now to remedy that and have a robust community discussion. And as you read in that article, it's been a little complicated actually to have the police and or city manager agree to have that. In fact, the representative from the city manager from the city said that meeting happened. That was when the police officer came and said, we want these things. There was a chance for anybody to say no. Actually, 2 people were in the audience.
Who did say no?
One person said, I like that idea. We need more policing in our community. Robert Norse, local activist, happened to be there because he goes to all the city council meetings and was there for another issue. He saw this thing come up, and it was actually, the title was traffic monitoring equipment. That was the title of the agenda item, and he spoke against it. It was not an opportunity for robust community discussion, and I want to encourage people to make that happen, to contact city council and the mayor and say there has not been a community discussion and the police are moving forward on this. And it's quite possible a lot of people would agree and take the stand of the local ACLU and say, not only, there's been some other communities that have said, we'll do this thing, but only if the data is stored locally and not shared. Brookline, Massachusetts decided to do that. But I think there could be a large number of people that would say, we don't want this at all. And I'd like there to be an opportunity for that to happen.
Yeah.
I want to throw in one more thing too. I think it ties in with a couple broader things that I'm hearing a lot of people concerned about actually in Santa Cruz. It's come to a lot of folks' attention that at the San Lorenzo River, at the point where it's running through downtown, a few bridges and behind businesses, there have been placed sound emitting devices ostensibly to make people not want to stay there. I think all of this has to do with law enforcement rather than community building. And again, without discussion, people are finding these, coming across these devices because they're paddling down the river or hanging out. And I've seen this trend in Santa Cruz since I've lived here since '89, where public spaces are diminished A lot of spaces have been made into public parks, which sounds nice. But for example, the town clock is a public park, which makes it have opening and closing hours, which makes it not possible to hang out there. These sound emitting devices are uncomfortable and probably doing damage to other living creatures around too. So I'm looking into that, and a lot of people are talking to me about that issue, and I think it all ties in with the way that policing is done here and without a public process.
Yeah. How can people contact the city council to kind of express their displeasure or support of such?
It's really easy. I don't know how much they listen. I would hope that they listen to all the communication. Email addresses are on the city website.
cityofsantacruz.com.
Yeah, and all of the city council people, as well as their phone numbers. You can also go in and talk to people directly. That's a good way to do it. Some of them say that they take action on issues that they hear a lot about. So I think that is a way to make something happen here. I'm disappointed that they haven't done more about this issue, because people are concerned about it, and the police obviously are moving ahead to get these things and start using them, and the CHP, like I said, is already using them. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. A problem that people point out about these cameras is that, for example, in Minneapolis, a newspaper requested the photos that had been taken of the mayor of Minneapolis some years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. And they published a little map of where the mayor had traveled, like 45 different spots over the past year. And it was after that that the mayor decided to revisit the policies and procedures.
All of a sudden he wasn't a supporter of
Exactly.
Imagine that.
So, and coming back to some of the stuff Danny is talking about, my perception is that data collected by the government is always used. It's used for a lot of things, and police point to legitimate uses for this. For finding stolen cars, it actually does quite well. The problem is the other things that it's capable of doing. And one of those things is data collected by the government is always used to disrupt and diminish democratic movements inside and outside this country. So a lot of people might say, I'm not worried if they know what I'm doing. That's an interesting position to take on a lot of levels. But one is, it's forgetting how social justice has happened here and around the world, and the forces that have come against it.
To stop it.
And data is always used to disrupt democratic movements.
Information is power, right?
Yeah.
They certainly called it counterintelligence program for a reason.
And these license plate reader cameras have already been used by New York police to record activist movements. They've been used to record people who go to certain religious places, Muslim, in New York. And there's a variety of other devices that are being used too that I'll just mention. San Jose police just got a drone. Secretly, actually. There was no public process about that. A lot of police in the Bay Area have Stingrays, which are suitcase-sized devices that simulate a cell phone tower and collect all the data from...
They can collect all the cell phone
happening in that area,
or calls, or data searches, etc.
Santa Cruz police and a lot of other police, Stingray, or Harpoon, or other names that are kind of huge, that have to do with, plunging. Cellbrite is another device that Santa Cruz police have and a lot of other departments have. It's a smaller device that you hook a cell phone into and it sucks all the data out of it. There was fairly recently a court case that said, as if you needed a court case to say this, like, you need probable cause. Police were pulling people over and kind of in the style of, can I search your car? And people are usually afraid
download the
to
contents
say
on your
no.
phone. There you go.
Yeah,
No big deal.
can I have your phone for 2 minutes? Facial recognition is also a technology that is being incorporated by police.
That's why I'm trying to confuse them.
Yeah, you're.
I'm trying to
Is that really
throw it
Sandino?
off, yeah. Tell me this.
And there's this persistent surveillance design that's happening, that's being tested around the country, that is essentially a fancy, very high-grade series of 10 or 20 cameras that are hooked together to form one camera that are put on the bottom of a Cessna and flown over a city that can essentially, for as long as the plane is flying, 7-9 hours, record and do live video of that area and be able to zoom in on any moving object at all, people, vehicles. This was tested over Compton in Los Angeles without anyone knowing about it. So those are some other things that are happening in the policing realm.
And it's important to note that one of the things that one is taught in the very first constitutional law course that one would ever take at any of the respectable law schools is that the constitutional protection requires one to look at what it is that could possibly be done if you authorize the government to do certain kinds of things. And historically, the executive branch has always gone to the legislature demanding the right to engage in certain types of conduct for the narrowest possible reasons that almost no one could disagree with. Of searching for criminals, searching for terrorists, searching for child pornographers. What they do is they think of the most spectacular thing that they could identify as to why they want to get this. And once they get it, they use it for every single thing that they can think of, which it goes all the way to normal law enforcement, then into political repression and community control. And for example, when they set up the National Intelligence Court, the surveillance court, that what they found out is in the very first year of the authorizing of federal officials to get these national security wiretaps, that they didn't require probable cause to believe that any crime had been committed. All they had to demonstrate was that there was reasonable grounds to believe that information potentially relating to the national security of the United States might possibly be discussed. And what they found is that in the very first year of the operation, there were 22 different cases in which that information had been used for normal garden variety law enforcement.
Right.
So that they'd completely
investigations they intended
they completely transgressed the constitutional requirement of probable cause for warrants. And given the history that we have with the COINTELPRO program and Operation Garden Plot, Operation Chaos, there's a whole series of these things that have been uncovered that if you give the authority to the executive departments, both in the federal government and the state, to do these narrow things, they will in fact abuse that. Right. And so those of us who are guardians at the constitutional gate often find ourselves having to try to stop the federal government and the state governments from being given certain types of authority, not because we don't think that if it were confined to the most narrow possible areas that it might not be constitutional, but we know what the history has been, what the pattern has been. When you have the relegation of such limited amounts of resources for the training of police officers, for the education of the police officers, for the constitutional training of the police officers, unless you have a very, very well-educated and a well-trained police department, you cannot, in fact, authorize them to have this kind of equipment because they will, in fact, use it to short-circuit their law enforcement efficiencies, and so that they'll use these things. And so that's why we have to be guardians at the gate of the Constitution and stop them from doing this, not because we support ISIS or because we support terrorism, just because we oppose the United States going in and invading and occupying the Middle Eastern oil fields does not mean that we affirmatively support all of the activities that people engage in to try to oust them. That's not true.
Pretty lazy argument to try and hoist on us.
That's right. Yeah. So I just think that we need to mobilize our citizenry right now through programs like this, through activities that we're going to have like at the end of October, where we're going to have a major demonstration of what it's going to look like to have military forces come into our community and start arresting people who they have some reasonable grounds to believe may have said something or done something.
Let's just round up everyone with an FBI file.
Well, you remember the T-shirts that the special forces used to wear back in Vietnam. It's
I don't personally,
kill them all, let God sort them out.
Yeah, I've heard that slogan.
Okay, and that's what this is. Is that when they get their ire up to go after people like ISIS, and that when you have them beheading people on national internet, people become kind of Pavlovian in their response, and they're going to authorize the executive branch to do anything they need to do to stop these people. But we cannot allow that to be done. We have to heed the call of many of the progressive Democratic Party people in the Progressive Caucus in the House of Representatives. They're calling for a debate in the United States Congress before authority is given to President Obama to do anything with regard to ISIS any further. Okay. And that's what needs to be done. We need to draw the line in the sand.
I'm looking at this cover here, and it's big data is watching you, right?
Yes.
But then, it makes me think, like, who's big data, quote unquote? Is it the federal government? Certainly, there are entire branches of the government dedicated to investigating us. But, what role do private corporations play in the absolute shredding and violation of our civil liberties and our constitutional protections? Like, I want to just ask you guys, because it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of a little symbiosis going on here between government and private entities, Google, Facebook, all of these data mining entities that, again, information is power, and it seems like most of them are more than willing to cooperate with government investigations like that.
The line needs to be clear that these corporations exist because they're given special state authority. These are not just combinations of private people. One needs to be careful in trying to apply constitutional constraints against just private individuals. Right. That if you don't happen to like what my political beliefs are, you can say insulting things to me, you can refuse to do whatever you might want to do with regard to me. But the state can't do that. And these large corporations exist only by dint of their special government authority that's been given to them. That they're given the right to do all kinds of things. They for example, immunize against direct civil liability the owners of the stock in those corporations. Right. They immunize the people that are in the management. They confine legal liability only to the assets of the corporation itself. That's all done by major legislation. So all of these things, these groups can be viewed as being creatures of the state to some significant degree. And that's why when people start out saying, I don't mind if Google, knows every single email that I've sent, or that Google knows, what my searches are that are on them, and that they're selling them to Macy's or Gimbals or wherever they are to try to decide what I might want to, what kind of ads they might want to slip into my thing. But the fact of the matter is that when they start communicating this information to the federal government, that has to be stopped. And the problem is, the same thing I point out, is that people who attempt to oppose that being done are immediately attacked as somehow supporting terrorists or supporting child pornographers or other things on the internet. And none of that is true.
Just a slander.
And you just have to be courageous. You have to be able to stand those particular slings and arrows shot in your direction, and just stand fast against this and say, look, I've seen this before, we've all seen this before. And that I'm sad to say in closing that the analogy that is the most apt is that which transpired between 1934 and 1938, actually in Germany. The step-by-step erosion of any of the rights of the individuals in that community, all in the name of overcoming them being victimized by the Allied powers, and that they used that kind of victimization to justify the restriction of liberties on their people, and that's what's happening right now. It's just like a bad movie that's playing out. But we have to become the protagonists in our own movie. And we have to be able to stand up against these people, and we need to combine together, because no individual single group can do it alone. So the ACLU and the Romero Institute and the Christic Institute and the individual reporters and the shows here that we have on on community television. We all have to mobilize together and get our efforts going in the same direction to stop the National Defense Authorization Act, to stop the Democratic Party from providing any further support to it, and get this thing basically rescinded.
That is a wonderful segue. We are wrapping up our show. We're pretty close, maybe about 5 minutes out or so. I would like to kind of end on a positive note and end on a sort of what can we do, where can people find more information, how can people get involved, how can people get plugged in. I'd like for both of you to just take 2 minutes or so to hit that, please.
Yeah.
Why don't we start with you, John?
I want to add something, just what was
Oh, yeah.
being talked about really briefly. Vigilant Solutions is the name of a private corporation that is amassing one of the largest databases of information in the country, especially license plate reader camera data. They have 2 billion records, and it grows by about 60 million a month. This is something that law enforcement people can buy a subscription to and tap into, and also put stuff into. Wow. They also sell data to other corporations who want it for marketing reasons. So this crossover is happening. I'll also mention that there's a private company called Palantir that designs software for police officers to be able to go through data like this, like at the regional intelligence centers I was talking about. Palantir was initially funded by the CIA. The CIA has a funding arm that picks out small companies that are up and coming, that are doing things that they think will be useful for them, and they fund them. Palantir is based in Palo Alto.
What a horrible use of J.R.R. Tolkien's works.
Yeah.
That is just stupid.
Some positive things. The ACLU is actually doing a lot of good work around anti-surveillance. There's a lot of good actions happening around the country. There's good reports about license plate reader cameras. You can find out a lot more. And there have been some successes in stopping surveillance programs. There was something called the Domain Awareness Center that was planned for Oakland. It would be a center that integrated all the surveillance of Oakland. People went to city council there and said, we don't want this thing, and it was stopped, and it was actually quite down the road to happening. In Boston, the license plate reader camera program was stopped. And also, ironically, Boston police were told that they would have GPS devices installed in their cars so administration would know where they were all the time. And they said, we don't want that. Not even police want to be surveilled. Another victory in San Francisco, surveillance cameras by the police were going to be increased. The number was going to be increased, and people said they didn't want that to happen either. So I would say look at the victories and talk to city council people here directly and say you don't want more surveillance.
Great.
It is true. It is true that not only on the local level, but even on the national level, that when in fact an adequately motivated constituency mobilizes and focuses its attention on Congress, you can usually get them to back off on these types of things. And that's why they try to do this so clandestinely.
Right.
That nobody, when we first heard about this National Defense Authorization Act, and we went to ACLU and started talking about it, and they were told, oh, don't worry about it. Nobody's going to really vote for something that's as draconian as that.
Right.
And then they said it's only the right-wing crazies in the House of Representatives that are doing it. But then the moderate Republicans were so intimidated by the right-wing Republicans that they went along with it. And then when the Republicans all went along with it, the conservative Democrats were so intimidated by it that they went along with it. And then the blue dog Democrats went along with it in those purple districts. And then when the Democratic Party itself ended up voting for it, they said, well, we'll put the onus on Obama. Obama, just all he has to do is not sign it.
Right.
And Obama, trying to placate everybody, as he always has, went ahead and signed it. And then said, well, you know that I won't use this against American citizens. But he has to leave it in place for whoever the next 2 or 3 presidents are. So the reality is that we have to mobilize at the very beginning to stop these things. And I think by identifying specific targets like this, the National Defense Authorization Act, to get this rescinded and to focus on the Democratic Party to get them to do this, and to focus on the year 2016 when the Democrats are going to be trying to retake the Senate if they lose it this time. And Hillary Clinton is going to be kind of marching to the White House. I think that we have an opportunity to focus on this, and she's going to be very sensitive about what support she's going to be getting and how actively the progressive community is going to be in supporting her candidacy, that we have to target Hillary Clinton, the Democratic Party, the year 2016, in the National Defense Authorization Act. When you do that type of targeting, you can mobilize your people to get this thing done, and this is an extremely important thing to achieve in the next 2 years.
Certainly sounds like it's time to draw a line in the sand.
It is
Either
that.
Just give them all the information they ever want, and or we stand up and reserve some privacy for ourselves.
Yeah, it's got to be, we've got to draw this thing to a close. And once we get the National Defense Authorization Act rescinded, we have to move in and start rescinding this general authorization for the use of force, because it's being used over and over and over again in this blind way. So we need to get that rescinded. It's the only way to stop it. We drafted, to stop the Vietnam War, the Cooper Church Amendment, where we actually drafted a resolution to withdraw the funding through Congress, and that's how we eventually got this thing stopped.
Well, we're going to have to do something very dang similar really soon here, because I certainly feel like the frog sitting in that warm pot, kind of slowly getting to a boil. Yeah, I'm going to jump out, because you know what, I'm not into this. I want to thank you, Danny Sheehan, so much. John Malkin, thank you, both of you. What a stimulating conversation. I think people could learn a lot from this. I'm glad it's going to be archived on YouTube. You can go to communitytelevision.org, look up Voices from the Village, check out all of our amazing shows. I'd like to send a special shout out to the cast, the crew, everyone who was involved in making this show possible. I want to send an extra special shout out to my friends and my family, all the people that helped make this happen. My name is Sandino Gomez. I've been here with John Malkin and Danny Sheehan. Santa Cruz, I just want to say, civil liberties, use them or lose them. Have a good night.